Recording. Okay, let's kick off today's class. Share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Where is the chat box? Okay. I'm just trying to look for the chat box. All right. 1 second. Yo, okay. How was the last class? The last class we had together. Do you have any questions? Were there any frustrations? Let's take the first 10 minutes to talk about that. Any questions? Was anything unclear after the class or after you watched the YouTube recording? Okay, so no one's responding. I believe it was clear. So today we're going to talk about typography. It's going to be a short class. And then in the last class, I said this was going to be a short class, and we ended up spending 2 hours and 10 minutes. But this one's going to be short, I promise. So, typography. What do we need to know about typography? Typography is basically in layman terms, they just call it fonts. That is the text you see on your websites and your mobile apps or digital interfaces. And typography can either make or break your system. Choosing the wrong fonts or the wrong font styles can actually, destroy a good design. So today we'll focus on typography. I wouldn't go into in-depth typography like creating types and all of that because you wouldn't need that for now. I'll just give you what you need to know for a start. Yeah. Are you guys still with me? Just let me know in the chat box. Okay, perfect. So types. So the first thing you need to know in Figma, because this is UI design, not UX, we're dealing with Figma. The first thing you need to know is that the types in Figma are imported from Google. So we have Google Fonts, which I would show you in a few minutes. Or if you want to check by yourself, the website is fonts.google.com. And Figma gets its types. That is, when I select this particular text I've written, you can see this text section. All the fonts family you see here are from Google Fonts. So that means any font you use from this list will definitely render well in your browser, right? That's the first thing you need to know. So if you visit fonts.google.com and you see a font you like on that website, you can come over here and you can choose it. It's going to appear. Yeah, that's the first thing I want you to know. Then another thing you'd know is that fonts have different weights, right? So I've chosen Roboto, and these are the different weights or the different styles for this particular font, Roboto. You have condensed, and condensed has different weights. So if I select this, it looks like a totally different font here. But the font family itself is Roboto. You have different weights for the original Roboto. extra light, semi-bold, and the likes, and you have condensed in, you have medium metallic. I guess Figma combined everything because it's still from Roboto. Because if you select this, you still have the Roboto condensed. You have other types, Roboto mono, slab, flex, and the likes. And next to the weight, you have the font size. I don't need to explain what this does. The higher the number, the bigger the font. And next to that, you have the line height. Now, you don't see the difference here because you have just one line of text. But if I decide to populate this with text, let's say with content reel, for example, let's just put in some lorem ipsum text. And let me just do it this way. Yeah. So right now the font size is 48 and the line height is 141. And the line height is basically the distance between each line in layman terms. So if I reduce this, they come together, right? Increase it and all that. But there are some websites that lets you generate like a line height scale, or basically what they do is you select a font size and they let you know the line height to use. But for me, I rather just put in what I feel is good, in the sense that if the line height scale or line height generator tells me for a font of 48, I need to use 120, right? And to me, 120 is too much. I can decide to reduce it myself to whatever I like, right? It's not necessarily set in stone. So let me show you an example of some line heights generators. I would have to share my other screen. Let me share web browser, I guess. Okay, yeah. So if you come to perfecttypography.com, right? So if you just search line height generator, you would see a lot of them. So perfecttypography.com, it considers the width of the text. So if the width is longer than this, the line height will be bigger. But if the width is smaller, the line height will be smaller. Does that make any sense? So the longer the text, the higher the line height, or the more the line height. The shorter the text, the shorter the line height. And you can see here I've put in 50 px for the width of the text and 16 for the font size. And it says the line height is 1.32 em. Em is basically, to get the line height, all you have to do is multiply 16 by this, and it will give you the line height in pixels. And you can see I've done something like that here. So I just searched on Google em to px, and it says em times the font size would give you in px. So 16 times this is 21.136, right? So let's try increasing this width to like 250. You can see it has increased the line height to 1.404 em, and that is 22.464 px line height, right? So what it's just trying to tell you is that the wider the text, the more the line height, the shorter the text, the smaller the line height. Let's look at another one called thegoodlineheight.com. And we put in 16. For this one, you can increase the multiplier as you wish. And this is just telling us that all you have to do is gauge it with your eyes, right? You can decide to use any multiplier you want. Then as long as it's fine with what you want, then that's okay. right? So it's not set in stone. So at 1.4, the line height is 24, but at 1.7, for example, is 32. And that's what I was trying to explain when I said the scale can give you something, but you just have to adjust it based on what looks good to the eye, right? And it takes practice, because if you're just starting out, you might not know if the line height is too much or too small. You understand? So I recommend using one of these websites that I've shown you. And this is also another one that works well. Another thing you can do in Figma is put in, let me go back to Figma. Another thing you can do in Figma is, if you don't know the line heights to use, let's say my text is 24, right? And this already looks too much. Just looking at it with your eyes, it looks too much. And you're unsure of the line heights to use. You want Figma to give you like a starting point. Let me put it that way. You can type in auto, and Figma automatically adjusts it for you. But to me, this is too small for line heights. And if you want to see the value, you can just tap on the box and you can see the value here is 24, right? Which is a bit too small. But you might be wondering, why is it too small? Like I said, it will take practice. So you can come back to either this or this and say your line height, your font size is 24, and the width of this text, as you can see here, is 541. So let's increase this to 541. And it says 1.45 EM. So let's convert that to pixels. It says we should use 23. Okay, sorry, this is 16. Why is it, where can I change it to 24? Okay. I was quite shocked when it brought in 23. You know what? I'll just use my calculator. So 1.45 times 24. It's gave me 34.8. So you can adjust that to 34.8, or just round it up to 35. And to me, this is fine. Or you can decide to increase it a bit yourself. So I think that's basically, it's about line height. It's the distance between each line of text. And one thing that is good to notice, the smaller the font size. So I've mentioned two things now. Let me type it out. So the wider the text box, I'll call it a text box. The wider the text box, that's the width, the more the line height, or the higher the line height. Then the shorter the word. What's the other word for this? Then the smaller the text box. Also the width, the smaller the line height. So another thing you should notice, the smaller the font, the higher the line height, and the bigger the font, the smaller the line height. So what this simply means is, right now we're using 24 and 41.5, which is close to an extent, is close to times 2 of 24. But if we increase this to 96, for example, let's put in auto and check it. It says 113, and 113 to me is perfect for this. right? And this is nowhere close to times 2 of 96. You understand? So if I take this down to 16, this says 19, which is still fine. But if the text is more than this, say it's a body text like a blog, this becomes too close to each other. So let me show you what I'm saying so you can, sorry. They look too close and the text becomes rowdy. Can you see it? So in this case, you'd have to increase the line height. Let's see, not 32%. Why is it showing me in percentage? Yeah, something like this works fine. So you can see this is approximately times 2. It doesn't have to be 32, but this works fine for me. But for a bigger text, the line height will be smaller. So 96 px, which is something like 113 px for the line height. Okay, talked a lot about line height. We've talked about the online calculator. We talked about using auto in Figma for the line height. Any questions so far? I know typography can be a boring topic sometimes, but yeah, we just have to do it. Are there any questions before I move on to the next thing? Where's this? Do you understand so far? Because I can see anything on the chat. I don't want to go too fast. Okay. Rama, we'll get to that. Okay. So the next thing in the Figma panel is, so let's select the text again. We'll get to that, Kelvin. I was just asking if you have questions for line height, basically, but we'll get to all of those questions. So the next thing close to the line height is the letter spacing, right? And it already says what it does, spacing between the letters, right? So if I increase this, you can see we have more spacing between each letter. And this can be useful, especially for add-ins. So you can reduce it as well, you can increase it. But I like to use it mostly for add-ins. So let's say I have a little card. Um, so let's say I have a little card, and this card has some kind of add-in. Let's say team bonding, and it has some form of text underneath. So we just so I'm take because it's a small card, I'll just take it down to, let's say, 14, and reduce the size of this to, this is just for demonstration purposes, right? So one thing I love to do is when I have a heading that's like this, I like to increase the letter spacing just a bit, something like this, and then give it, you know, a different color. It could be purple, for example, it's kind of adds, I don't know what to call it, like a flair to the design. I use it mostly for headings, not for body text, because the letter spacing for this text has already been predefined, no doubt. But increasing this sometimes just makes the text look off, or body text. But for headers, you can definitely play with this. So if it was a bigger header, say 96, for example, I'll change this to auto, and you feel this is, you can decide to reduce it. Maybe you use black. Yeah, you can decide to reduce it to your taste. Although this is already too small, but there are some fonts that have, let me see, I think Montserrat. How do you spell Montserrat? Yeah, so something like Montserrat, if I take this down to 0, the spacing is okay between each letter, but you can decide to take it down a bit to add to your style. So you can definitely play around with letter spacing when it comes to heading. I advise it mostly for heading, but for body text, just leave it as 0. It works perfectly like that. Then moving on from letter spacing, this is quite explanatory, which is the paragraph spacing. It's different from line height, right? This is totally different from line height. So let's see that with this one. And if you increase the line height, so this is basically, how would I explain this? You know, paragraphs. You start a new paragraph when you're done with maybe a section of a story. We all went to school, I suppose. So the reason why it's increasing at all points is because I pressed enter at each of these points. So if I take this down to like this, okay. So when you press enter, you create a new paragraph. So at this point, I will press enter, and we should see the paragraph spacing affect from this place, like take effects from here. At least that's what should happen. You can see if I take this back to here and use shift enter, which is not really like a paragraph, you can see the difference. But if I increase the line height, it affects each individual line. Do you understand what I've done so far? Okay, let me rephrase. So paragraph spacing is basically when you press enter, not when you press enter. Paragraph spacing is the spacing between each paragraph. And to start a new paragraph, you press enter on your text. So right now, if I take this back to this line and I press enter, this is a new paragraph. This starts a new paragraph, right? And for all of this, if you remember correctly, when I started, I pressed enter for each of the lines, right? So I should probably just show it again so you understand what I'm saying. This is a line of text, right? Let's call it a paragraph. Right now, we don't have any other paragraph. If I decide to press enter here, this is a new paragraph, right? And if I decide to increase the paragraph spacing, you can see what it does because it's the spacing between these two paragraphs because they are different paragraphs. But if I use Shift Enter, which is just breaking to a new line, not necessarily starting a new paragraph, it shouldn't affect it. Can you see? It shouldn't affect it. But if I copy this text, yeah, paste it again, and this time I press Enter at this point, remember this is just a replica of this. And it's just broken into two lines, not necessarily two paragraphs. But right now, I pressed enter at this point. So this means this is a new paragraph, right? So if I do this, it should affect this. But if I increase the line height, it affects each individual line. I was just trying to explain the difference between both of them, between the line height and the paragraph spacing, because it looks like they were doing the same thing. Okay, moving on from the letter spacing. I explained I use it mostly. This is my preference. Other people can have it or can do it differently. I just love doing it for headers, right? And I mentioned you can reduce, not only increase. So depending on what you are trying to achieve, you can do whatever you want here. But you just have to be careful so that whatever you're doing is still readable by whoever is going to use it. So the next thing I would like to talk about is let's see. So I've mentioned where you can find fonts. So I mentioned Google, fonts.google.com, and all the fonts from that place is here, right? So let's go back to my browser and we'll check out fonts.google.com and see what we can do over there. So share web browser. Yeah. So this is fonts.google.com. And you can see you have a whole lot of different fonts here. And you can filter out what you want. So if you click on, can that person mute? Okay. So if you click on categories, you can see you have different categories of fonts. We have the serif, we have the sans serif, display, handwriting, and monospace. These are different categories of fonts. These are like the standard categories, right? So let's look at serif first. What are serifs? Serifs have this little extensions.
We can't see your screen. Sorry, we can't see your screen.
Oh, this thing has stopped sharing again. Okay. WebEx. I can't find the controls. This is so strange. Can you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, you can see.
Okay, yeah. So what I was saying before was initially all of this was selected, yeah. And this is fonts.google.com. And when you click on the categories, you have different types of fonts. You have serif, sans serif, display, handwriting, and monospace. So we start with serif. And serif fonts, if you look at them, they all have this little, is this slab they're called, or extensions at the sides or at the bottom of them. So if you scroll, you see all of them have these little extensions. That is one way you can identify a serif font. So they all have the extensions. Let's just call them extensions for now. I don't know the right words to call them. Right? That's one way to know the serif fonts. And serif fonts are like, I call them classic fonts. And they're kind of used for, yeah, to show your website is classy, to show your website has some form of luxury, something of that sense. So for example, if you visit let's say Abu Dhabi, I don't know what it's called, or let's just search for luxury hotels in the world, for example. And okay, let's just look for, okay, let's search for this one. I don't know if this is the website, but yeah, you can see they use a serif font for their headers, right? So when you want your website to show this form of classiness, I don't know if there's a word like classiness, but you want it to show style, you want to show class and luxury. A lot of times people use a serif font. And I was going to tell you how to identify the fonts, but we'll come back to this shortly. So I just wanted to show you how people use serif fonts. Of course, you can use it for other examples, not necessarily luxury, but it all depends on the style you're trying to show. You know, design is not necessarily it's not one way, it's not a one-way street. You can always experiment with different things. But just make sure you're passing across the right messages with the right fonts or the right typography. So that is serif. Let's look at sans serif. So sans serifs they don't have those extensions like I showed you on with serifs. They are more somewhat rounded in a way, right? They don't have those little extensions we saw recently. And they are more used for, they give this modern look. And I recommend using sans serif for your body text, right? So what I mean by body text is the main text on your website, not the headings, right? So you can also use sans serif for your headings. You can mix sans serif and serif. So serif can be your heading, sans serif can be your body text, right? And font pairing is another thing we'll talk about. So how do you know how to pair fonts? Well, we'll get to that shortly. Display is basically what we can see here. I don't really use this a lot, but there are definitely use cases for this. But I rarely use this. I mostly use the sans serif and serif. So in your spare time, you can look at other types, handwritings and monospace. Aside from that, the other thing you can check for on Google Fonts, the font properties. So you can decide the number of styles you want. Like if you're searching for, you want to use, you don't know the fonts to use for your design. Probably there's no brand guideline to tell you that, okay, this is the font the brand uses. Or you're just, designing for fun. You can come here to determine the number of styles you want, the thickness of the font, if you want it slanty, you want the weight to be more and all of that. And one thing people propose or designers propose is when choosing a font, make sure the number of styles are at least 5, I guess, because when you don't have this number of styles, it can really limit your work. I would say just go for 10. So you have something like thin, regular, medium, semi-bold, bold, extra bold, black. Then you have the thin italic, the regular italic, medium italic. You understand? So when you have those options, it makes your work easier for you because there are fonts over here that, let me uncheck this. For example, look at this Ubali. It has just one style, and this would limit you a lot in your work because you would definitely need like a bold style or a semi-bold or an italic or something like that. And all it's giving you is a regular style. So you'd have to be careful when choosing. You can also, what else can you do here? You can increase the font size, which is, I don't know, you might not need this. You can type in what you wanted to show as preview. And what else? Yeah, so that's Google Fonts. Google Fonts used to have um, a pairing generator. So for example, when I select this, there used to be another tab, pairings. So it lets you know what you can pair with this particular font, but for some reason they no longer have it. I don't know why. But aside from Google Fonts, you can also install fonts from other websites. So an example is Adobe Fonts. I think I searched for that before. Yeah. So Adobe Fonts also has some very nice fonts as well, but they don't come pre-installed in Figma. So you'd have to download the fonts, install it on your computer, then Figma picks it up. So they also have like different types of fonts. So if you don't find what you want in Google Fonts, you can come to Adobe Fonts, then install it on your PC, then Figma picks it up. And yeah, there are other websites as well, but Google Adobe are like the most popular. So how can you identify fonts on a website? So I see a website and I like the font. For example, I like this font, but I don't know what it's called. I have no idea. So what some people do is they right click and click on inspect, and inspect shows you the code. Okay, what happened? This shows you. I really don't know what's going on. What's the problem? Sorry. Yeah. So looking at this, it shows you the font is TF arrow, and it has like a backup font called Times New Roman. But this is a quick way to identify fonts on a website. Let's look at what they used for this one. They used Jumeirah font 2. I'm guessing these are custom fonts. I don't know. But that's a quick way to do it. So you just right click and inspect, right? And you can click on this for more precision. So select an element in the page to inspect it. So just hover over it and it shows you the font and other details. But if you don't want to use the inspect panel, you can use Chrome extension. So if you go to Chrome Web Store, you search for Chrome Web Store and you look for a plugin called I use What's the Font. You can install, I think I used this one, I'm not very sure, but you can install any of this. And what it does is, let's go back to the website. I think I have it somewhere here. Oh, looks like I don't have it. My bad. So let's install one of it and see how it works. This is not the one I used before. 1 second, sorry. This is not the one I use. When I find it, I would send it to the Slack group. So what that one does is you just hover over the text and it shows you the font family, it shows you the weight, it shows you everything that has to do with the text, but I'll look for it and let you guys know. So pairing fonts, let's go back to Figma for a bit. Or no, before we go back to Figma, to pair your fonts, I would say it takes practice as well to know which fonts, like which two fonts you can pair together. And to be on the safer side, you can just use one font. People recommend not using more than 2 types of fonts in your design, right? Because once it's more than 2, it becomes quite confusing. But there are some websites or some online generators that help you just generate some random fonts for you. I think I have one of it open here. It's not perfect typography. Let's just search for fonts pairing generator. Okay, so this is fontsjoy.com. So what this does is just generates random fonts pairings for you. So this says you can use Montserrat for your heading, and you can use Int Maduria for your body text. They both look good to me. So if you're looking for new font combinations to use in your design, you can definitely use this. And you can keep generating until you see something you like that makes sense to you. So that is fontjoy.com. I think this one works good as well. You can just come to font pairings and you can see different font combinations, Nonito and Sans Sans. So this is Nonito and this is Sans Serif. So there are different combinations on this website. But if you go back to Figma, there is some other options, or there are some other options you can see as well. Let's go back to Figma for a second. Can you see my Figma screen? Yeah, what font is nice? I think there's also a mobile app. So if you can see my Figma. I don't really just. Oh, it says I'm sharing Figma. Okay. Oh, you guys couldn't see my screen all through. I really have an issue with this particular.
See your screen.
No, I mean before this, could you see when I was going to inspect? This when I was going to inspect extensions.
Yeah, I could see those.
Okay,
Yes, we
okay,
saw everything. We could see it.
oh, perfect. Because I saw messages from, I'm just seeing messages from people saying
Saw
they
it
couldn't see
before.
my screen. Okay, perfect. Okay, yeah. So back to Figma, I was gonna say that there are some, are there plugins? I don't think there are plugins for, I might be wrong, but I don't think there are plugins. But if you go to the Figma community and you search for fonts pair, okay, there are two Figma files you can look at. So these are some really good fonts pairings. I already duplicated it, so it should be this one. So you can look into what person has done. This is Source Sans Pro, and this is Allegria, right? So you can just check any of them that makes sense to you. Philosopher and Molish. I like Molish a lot. This is Outfit and yeah, the same fonts, Outfit and Outfit. So you can just go through. It has about how many different styles here? 32 different pairings. The same thing for the second file. This one, I already duplicated it. And this has different categories. So it has like the classic, like I told you about serif fonts. They use classics a lot. Display for display, one of my favorite serif fonts. I've never used Alice, but they all look very good to me. So you can see it uses mostly serif for the headers. There are people who use serif for body text, but I'm not really a big fan of serifs for body text, but it isn't bad. Just, make sure it looks good. That's it. So you have the elegant side, you have the modern. Like I said, modern fonts mostly uses sans serif, as you can see here. So you can just go through all of this in your spare time. So whenever you're stuck, you don't know the font pairing you want to use, you can just visit either of these files, or you can go to the websites I showed you, the fontsjoy.com and the other one, or just search for fonts pairing generator on Google. You'll be able to see all of those things. Then Fonts pair. I think there is a plugin. Yeah, exactly. So accidentally creates font pairing. So what this does is it just generates different font pairs for you as well. So if we come back here and we search for accidental, by the way, that shortcut is Control and /. It's just a way to search. In case you didn't hear me, it is Control plus /. If you use a Mac, it's Command plus /. So it brings up this little menu. You can search for basically anything. So what this does is just creates random pairings for you. So I've clicked on create and it should generate something. Yeah. So this has generated this very nice font pairing, I would say. So it's showing here that it's Montserrat medium for the header and Cormorant light for the body. And you can see it's here. So if you keep generating, you keep clicking create, it keeps bringing different pairings for you. And you can decide to choose whatever you want. I love the fact that it's well organized over here. So this is another option for you in case you're stuck on the kind of fonts to use for your designs. So, yep, that's pairing fonts, choosing fonts. We've talked about identifying fonts. So I talked about what the fonts extension. Is it what the font or what fonts? I think it's what font. They also have a mobile app, which I've used before. So if you see a font on your phone and you like it, you can just take a screenshot, put it on the mobile app, and it brings out tons of fonts that look very similar to what you've taken a screenshot of. We've talked about finding fonts, Google Fonts, Adobe Fonts. We've talked about line height. We've talked about letter spacing. And another thing I love to talk about is font alignment. So when it comes to font alignment, some people do stuff like this. So when you have a long text, right, it's good to always left align, right? Always left align when you have a long text. I've seen people do this before, and trust me, it's not good. So a typical example is when you have a card, and let me just increase this. Probably on the design, you have different cards. I want to show you guys a typical example. Permit me to stop sharing for a bit because the example I want to pick out, I shouldn't be showing it in public, but I'll just copy and paste it. So I'll come back to my web browser for a second. Just enjoy this view for now. Give me a second. I think I have it somewhere here. I just wanted to, how can we get the font pairing files? Figma community. So you just go to your home screen. On this screen, you can click explore community and, just search for what you want. That's basically, so you can search for plugins, you can search for anything basically. So you have files, you have plugins, you have creators, you have widgets. What you basically need is this two plugins or files, and that's it. So a good example is when you have this kind of design on your browser, maybe it's a website and you have like something like this, maybe 3 of this, for example. This is a short text, right? It's nothing much, so it's okay to, you know, center align. But when the text is more than this, I didn't use auto layout for this, so the text is going to. So yeah, when you have a long text, using center align doesn't really make any sense. So it's always good to use center align only when the text is very short, right? You can also have situations where in your website, let's say something like this, and you've definitely seen designs where you have maybe an image here, then you have some form of text on this side. So let me just copy this text. Something like this. For design purpose, let me just increase the text. So auto, and I'll just do this. So yeah, so what I wanted to just say is even when you have a text that is this short or this small, and you're using this form of design where you have image on one side, text on the other side, then image on this side, because we see this a lot in web design, and text on this side. Yeah. I wouldn't advise using center align. To me, it doesn't just fit well. To someone else, it might look good, but visually speaking, this doesn't look good compared to this. It doesn't look good compared to this because this is no longer, how do I explain this? I'm trying to explain my reasoning behind this, but visually, it doesn't look good. Yeah. So when you have this form of layout, make sure you still use left align, not center align. But when you have it in small spaces like this, like for cards, then yeah, it's fine. You can also have center align for something like this. So let's assume there is let's say there's an header, something like this. And some text. So normally you shouldn't just be dragging like this, but yeah, I'm just trying to explain some things. So for example, if you have this, okay, first of all, this text is too long, so I'll cut it into 2. So this doesn't make sense to be left aligned. You agree with me, yeah? Because it kills the, what's the right word? I'm trying to think of the right terminologies to use here, forgive me. But it doesn't look good because this is in the center and having this left aligned doesn't make sense. But if you put it as center align, now it looks balanced. Yeah, the visual balance, that's what I was talking about. The visual balance is better when this is center aligned. But of course, your text shouldn't be too much despite that, right? So you shouldn't say, okay, because the visual balance is center aligned, then I can keep having a lot of text like this. This doesn't make sense, right? So you should always, there are people or there are clients that will tell you, we want this amount of text here because we want to explain everything we're doing, blah, blah, blah. You tell them, summarize what you want to, I think 3 lines is fine. To 3 lines, basically, it's fine. Once it's getting more than 3 lines, it begins to look a bit off. So summarize everything you want, max 3 lines, and you should also consider the width as well, right? To keep the visual balance. Another thing you should know about aligning text is you should align numbers to the right. So if you have a table, your numbers should be to the right hand side. So let me just draw a very terrible table for now. So I hope you guys are following me. I understand it's boring, but yeah, we don't just have a choice. So when you have a table, what is considered an appropriate text length? People have different definitions. Some people say, I don't know if I don't think I taught you guys layout grid, but say you have, let me just take this down to, yeah, let's just leave this for now. So some people will tell you in the 12 column grid, your text shouldn't be more than 8 columns, right? So if you take 1, 2 out, 1, 2 out, your text width should be more than this. This is what some people say. Some other people say your text shouldn't be more than a particular number of characters. Some other people say your text should be more than a particular width. So I think it really depends. But one thing you should know is that when your text becomes too long, like in one stretch, it becomes tiring to read. If you look at blogs, even Facebook and some other people, like blogs or Facebook, web apps in general, you noticed all their texts are aligned in the center. Then they put some other things on the left and right hand side. So if you go to, let me try to open the blog. I'll share my screen and you will see it. I know you can't see my screen just yet, but I would share it with you now. Yeah. Can you see my web browser now? I think you should be able to see it. WebEx, what's the problem? I have a serious problem with this tool. So yeah, if you look at this, we have this amount of space right across the screen, but the text is focused on just this part of the screen. So let's look at what size they've used. This is 674, right? And if you have the patience, you can also count the number of characters, but you'd see that they don't drag the text from. You guys can't see my screen, but it says I'm sharing my screen. 1 second. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so what I was
No.
saying is, oh,
Okay,
Can
yeah, I can
see
see
your
it now. I can see
screen.
it now. Yeah, I can see it now. Sorry.
okay, perfect. So what I was saying is,
Sorry, how did you do that ruler thing?
oh, it's an extension. It's called Page Ruler Redux. You can check
Page
it.
ruler redux.
Yeah,
Okay,
Page Ruler
thank you.
Redux. You're welcome. You can also inspect as well if you don't want to use that to check you can see it uses 670 times 210. And you can see she's using 15px Montserrat, right? So yeah, so I was just saying that fine, the owner of this blog, this lady, or the developer didn't, use the entire screen. So I can't remember exactly how it was, blah, blah, didn't start from here and end somewhere here, you understand? So you have to consider your text. Make sure it's not too long. I would say, yeah, use this 8 column pixels, or you can check various design systems. I think like I say, there is no standard per se. People define the length or the width of the text based on their design system, but just make sure it's not something too long. That's what I would say. I don't have a specific in mind. I've not seen a standard somewhere, but make sure it's not too long. You can say, okay, you don't want it to be more than 15 words per line, or you don't want it to be more than 120 characters per line. It's up to you, but just make sure it's not too long. Yeah, I think I answered that question. So let's go back to Figma, I guess. Let me look at the chat box. To be honest, I find it difficult navigating this. Some say 45 to 65. Yeah, like I said, people define what they want. So down to you. I was gonna talk about, yeah, so type scale, right? Type scale is basically, someone is on speaker so I can hear myself. Okay, so type scale has to do with the scale. So how many font sizes do you need for your design? So it might be difficult to tell this right from the beginning of the design, and it's okay. You can always put in what you want, but people have defined different scales that can be used. So I'll give you an example. The base fonts, what I mean by base fonts is the sort of standard font size people require for websites is 16 pixels, right? So they tell you that's like the base font size for websites. That's the most accessible, not like the most accessible, but the minimum accessibility starts from there, 16px, right? So if I take this down to 16, I would zoom in a bit. You might say, okay, what do I need for my header? So I have headers. What size do I want for my headers? What size do I want for my buttons? What size do I want for my labels? What size do I want for my captions? It's a whole lot of things to think about, but there are Figma plugins that can help you with that. So I don't know if I have one installed here. Typescale. Okay, I don't. So let's install Typescale. We go back to the community and yeah, types. I prefer this Typescales. So what it does for you is it generates different types, or it generates different font sizes based on a type scale. So let's look at how that works. Select type scale, and you can see it has generated different font sizes with their line height. So it says the base size is 16, which you can always change, but like I said, 16 is like what is recommended. Then it says scale. If I click on this, you can see there are different types of scales. You have minor second, major third, minor third. You might be wondering, what does this mean? So right now we're on 1.25, which is the major third. And you would see that it has like 10, 13, 16, 20, 25, 31, 39. But if I decide to change this to, let's say, -second, we have closer values. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, which is basically almost everything, no distance between them. And you don't want this kind of scale, because if you're using 16 for your body text, for example, you would have to define all of this. So people will get confused. Imagine I come to your design system and I'm like, okay, what do you use 17px for? What do you use 18px for? How do I know when to use 19? How do I know when to use 16? That's because they are all very close to each other. So I would recommend using -second. So if we choose a larger value, like this golden ratio of 1.6, you can see you have 6, 10, 16. There's a big jump to 26, which doesn't really make much sense, because in a real design setting, you would need values between 16 and 26. You might want 18, you might want 20, you would want 24, you might want 22, something like that. So this is a very big jump. So that's why I guess it's selected this, because this is giving enough space, but at the same time has close values. So you have 11, 13, 16, you have 19, 23, 28. Between 23 and 28, you might want something. Between 33 and 40, you might want something, but you might not necessarily want something between 40 and 48, because they are somewhat, it's for headers. So you can say this is your H2, you can say this is your H1. It doesn't really matter the distance, you understand? So when you generate this, let's assume we generate this. So it has generated, let me just move this here. So it has shown us everything we need for our designs. We need 11, we need 13, we need 16, for example. And the good thing about this is type scales are not, I wouldn't say they are set in stone, because you might start designing and realize that, oh, I need a value between 23 and 28, because the difference in size visually is too much between both of them. So you can say you want something between 23 and 28, and you can put that in by yourself. So you don't have to say, oh, because the type scale generated these values for me, I can't add anything to it, neither can I remove from it. No, it shouldn't be that way. So it's not set in stone. And yeah, there are other plugins as well. You have this one, type scale. I've tried it as well. I've not tried any of this, but this works perfectly. You can also go to you can also check out other design systems. So let me go back to my browser to show you what I mean. I believe you can see my browser. So if you go to material.io, which is this, so all you have to do is search for material.io typography. Material.io is Google's design system. So this is the design system Google uses, and it's one of the, I think it's like the most popular design system, right? So when you click on that link, it brings you over here, and you can see their type system. You can see everything about it. And this is an example of their type system. They have 10, 12, 14, 16. They don't have 18. I love to have 18, 20, 24, 34. So you can decide to use this exact type system and, just tweak it to your taste. And like I mentioned, you'd have to define what each one does. So yeah, for example, you can see captions, which are basically the captions of pictures, like this one. This is like a caption. It uses 12. All button sizes uses 14, and it says it's all caps. So all buttons should be in uppercase. It has defined 14 also for body 2. So you can have the same size doing different things. Yeah, and you can see 14 also is subtitle. They've also defined the weight, and they've defined the letter spacing. So for example, you can see for H6, it has a little increase in letter spacing, same as button, a little increase in letter spacing. So all of this is good to, all of these are good to define in Figma. So you can also have an overview like this. the one the type scale generated for us is good, but you can also, make it look somewhat like this. So aside from material design, you can also check Adobe Design System. And yeah, they've also defined how you should use the headers, what you should use, what you shouldn't use, and all of that. So design system, which is a different topic on its own, has to do with a lot of documentation and all of that. But if we come to Adobe Design System called Spectrum, you can see they've used 11, 12, 14, 16, 18, and someone talked about responsive scale. How can we make the scale responsive? So you have sizes for desktop, sizes for mobile, and the thing is, you can define this in Figma. Say for desktop, you want to use 11 pixels for the body. No, this is their base size. So they want to use 14px for desktop, but 17px for mobile. What that means is in their products, if viewing on desktop, for example, let's assume this is one of their products, this would be 14px. But if I change the size to mobile or view this same product on my mobile, it would change to 17px. And they've done that using design tokens. Design tokens is a totally different topic. I don't think it's something we're going to do in this course, but yeah. So this makes it responsive, but at the same time, you can also define this in Figma as well. So we'll talk about saving styles in Figma in just a minute. So I just wanted to show you the font sizes different design system uses. You can also check other design systems like Polaris. You can check Audi, is it Audi? How was it pronounced? I don't know. You can check Ant design system. You can check different design systems to see how they've, set up their typography scale. So let's go back to Figma, and I think this is the last thing I'll be talking about today. I believe you can see my Figma screen. Yeah, so back to Figma, like I said, you can, instead of just having it this way, you can also define the line height, which is what they've done for us using rem, but you can also change that to px. Just multiply 40 by 2.5 and change it to px. If there's letter spacing, you can put it here as well. You can put in the weight of each of them, right? So let's define some styles in Figma. Is that what I want to talk about next? Yep. So let's define some styles in Figma. So let's say, for example, you want, you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste something I've already done, so it's faster and I don't have to do everything one by one. So I know you can see my screen. Just give me a second. Where are you? So let me know, is there anything that is not clear as at this point? So I don't go too far before. Do you understand everything up to this point? Yusuf, you're not sure. What's the question, Atineke? What do you find unclear? Let's discuss it before I move forward. Yeah, what exactly, so we can move from there. If you can tell me what you don't understand, then hmm, something is wrong with my computer. Something seems to be wrong. Sorry.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, yeah. So just wanted to show you that something like this, you can define your types somewhat like this, right? So I've defined displays, which are more like headers, but displays are majorly large headings, so I'll put it that way. And you can see I've displayed or I've defined um, the regular one and the bold one. Same goes for the medium size, regular and bold. Display small, regular and bold. For my body text, I've also defined regular, bold, and italics. So what I wanted to show you is that right now, all it has shown is the sizes and the line height, but there will be situations where you need, for example, if this is your body text, you might need your body text to be regular instead of semi-bold that is showing here. You might need your body text to be italics. So you'd have to define some of these things in your Figma style. So let's try doing that. I taught you guys how to save styles in Figma the last time. So we can take this one, which I've called display large, and we can, I was using a different font. That's why it's showing this error, and I don't have the font. I just copied and pasted it. So all you have to do is click on this 4, click on the plus icon. Okay, I can't because I can't edit the text. Makes sense. Fine. So, so let's just use this. Click on this. This is Roboto 48 semi-bold. And here you can define if it is desktop or mobile. Remember I showed you Google Fonts, which uses, no, not Google Fonts, Adobe Fonts, which has different sizes for desktop and for mobile. So I'll just put the screenshot in Figma so you can see what I'm talking about. I should round up very soon. So give me 1 second. I'm just trying to take a screenshot so I don't have to bounce between screens. Okay. Yeah. So I was talking about this. So you have this size for desktop and a different size for mobile. So one way you can specify that in Figma, if you remember, I used the slash method. So you come to this 4 dots, click on plus, and you can say this is for desktop, right? And you can call this, let's go with the regular H1, desktop slash H1. And you can say this is H1 semi-bold, for example, right? And you create style. And you can say for mobile, you want to use this as the H1 for mobile. So you just come back here. You can see we have desktop slash H1. So you just call it mobile slash H1 slash semi-bold. And don't forget, before you save your styles, always remember to check all of this, right? Always remember to check all these settings because you might completely forget. So for example, it has defined this as 2.5. Fine, it's going to insert this here, but in a situation where you don't define it yourself, like I think I defined it here, did I? Yeah. But in a situation where you don't define it yourself, you're just going to save it as auto or whatever value that was there before. And you end up, you know, making mistakes when saving your styles. So make sure you check everything. And make sure this is what you want, this is what you want here, this is what you want here. There are other details here which you can check. So underline, strike through, paragraph spacing. I know I didn't talk about all of this, but it's something you can, you know, check by yourself. And make sure everything is correct, then you save the style. Of course, when you save a style, you can always edit it, right? But it's just good to check it before saving to avoid double work. So you can see I have desktop H1 is 48, mobile H1 is 33. So that's one way to define it. You can also say you want maybe a regular for your heading for some reason, I don't know. So you save it as desktop H1 regular. You create the style. And you can see we have H1 semi-bold regular. So in the case where you have H2, it's going to put it in its own folder as well. So desktop slash H2 slash semi-bold. We did all of this last week, right? And you can decide to put one for regular as well, so we can see how it saves the style. So desktop slash H2 slash regular, right? So you have desktop, you have mobile, another desktop, you have H1, you have H2, and they have semi-bold regular, semi-bold regular. So anybody coming into your design system or your Figma file can say, okay, I want H1 for mobile. I want a heading for mobile. You can come to mobile, select the heading you want, and, you know, move ahead. The same thing goes for the other ones, the body, the whatever you want to use for your labels, whatever you want to use for your helper text, your caption. You just have to save everything like that. So an example is this design system file I saw on Figma community. So you can see for their displays, they have D1, D2, D3. They have headings spelled out like this. They have the body, large, regular, small, and all for buttons and labels. So you can be very, very specific with the way you save your text. So you can see they have labels. The label, helper text, and input. No, the label and helper text are basically the same thing in terms of font size and line height, but they still specified it like you should use this for helper text, mainly because I'm sure the difference will be in the weight. So this uses medium, this uses regular. I thought as much. So, and yeah, you can also see it from this little, you can see this is lighter in weight compared to this. So you can also specify this as well when defining your styles in Figma. Are there any questions so far? That's the last thing I want to talk about today. And yeah, before I forget, you can also read more about typography in the same book I recommended last time, Refactoring UI. There is a little chapter on typography. You can read that as well. It's really insightful. And I also mentioned going through design systems. Just search for top design systems on Google, and you would see a lot of them. You'd see material design, you see Spectrum, Polaris, and you see Salesforce, which is Lightning Design System. You see a whole lot of them. Or just check the Figma community and type in design system. You will see a whole lot of them. Design system. Yeah, you'd see a whole lot of design systems. So you can check the typography section and see how they've defined their styles and all that. Can you show an example of how to install a font in Figma or solve the problem of a missing style? So for example, like this one I showed you. So this was a font I used in a different work called Plus Jakarta Sans, which I don't have at the moment. So I'd have to go download it, right? I have to download the font, install it on my PC. Then once I install on my PC, I come back to Figma and it's there. Sometimes you'd have to restart Figma and it shows up. So you don't need to install the font in Figma. You install it on your PC. So once you download the font, most times they come in as a zip file. Unzip the file, you see the fonts, right click, then install for all users. Once it's done installing, come back to Figma, you'll be able to edit the text. Yeah. So if you don't find the font online, you can always replace it with something else over here. Does that answer your question, Tony? Yeah, good. Any other questions so far? Any questions? Anyone? Everyone is quiet compared to the last class where there was a lot of things going on with the auto layouts, layout grids, and all that. So it's understandable. So guys, if there are no questions, I really hope you totally understood everything I said. And just as recap on saving typography styles. Okay, so like I mentioned, you just click on the style you want. This is currently Roboto semi-bold 16. This is the line height in percentage. Remember, we generated this using a plugin. Letter spacing is 0, so you can check all of this, make sure it's correct. You check all of this is correct. Most of the times you don't need to come in here, but yeah. Once they're correct, you click on the 4 dots, click on plus, right? And this is 16px. So we can say this is our desktop, because we want it to be the desktop size, and we want it to be the body text, which is the main text that would appear most on the website. And this is currently semi-bold, so semi-bold. I didn't click on create style. So desktop body semi-bold, save. And 16px also works well for mobile. So you can define that as well and say this is also for mobile. You just change desktop to mobile. Great. So when you look at this, you have body semi-bold for mobile, and you also have body semi-bold for desktop. So it's just a way to make people using your file understand that, fine, we have this design system, or we have this typography skill like this, but the fact that this is H1 doesn't mean that it's going to work for mobile as well. So you'd have to check my styles and see that my H1 is really 33, but for desktop, my H1 is 48. Do you understand, Chidima? And who else asked us?
Do thank
I have
you.
a question.
Okay.
When I was reading refactoring UI, I came across this let me just read it out. They said that if you want your system to make a sizing decision easy, make sure no two values in your scale are ever closer than about 25%. So I don't understand what this means.
Yeah, so what they mean is, for example, looking at this screenshots that I've shown you, when you have, so from my little experience here, from values lower than, let's say, 24, right? Although this doesn't show what I want to talk about. But for values lower than 24, the sizes can be close. So you can have 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. But when it's above 24, the sizes are becoming big, right? So you can have 24, then jump to like 28, which is a 4 pixels gap between 24 and 28. From 28, you can move to 32 or 36. Then the higher you go, once you get to 36, you don't need to do 40. You can go as high as 44 or 48. I believe that's what they were referring to. So values below 24 is okay to have values that are close, because you will have those values appear various times across your website. So for example, you can have 12 for your icon labels, you can have 14 for your form labels, you can have 18 for subtitles, you can have 16 for body text, you can have 20 for like H6, which is a very small header, you can have 24 for H5, right? But there's really no point contemplating if you should use 44 or 48 for H2, because they are both big sizes, right? And the difference wouldn't matter much. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wait, like that 25%, is it 25% of, sorry, of the like base scale or something?
To be honest, I'm not sure, but from what I've experienced so far, and I think they also mentioned it in Refactoring UI,
Yeah,
that
that's where I
between,
got it from.
yeah, exactly. So between these smaller values, you might need, so for example, if you use a scale generator and you have 16, then the next value in the scale is 24. That's it's a very big gap, because you definitely need values between 16 and 24. You might need 18, you might need 20. If you don't need 18, you might need 20, you might need 22. You understand? So, but once it's above 24, you can have 24. The next one can be 28 or 30 or something like that. Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? Can you talk on plugins for calculating typography again? So I mentioned just one plugin, which is called Typescales. This one. Yeah, so this is what I mentioned. And you can set a base size. Like I mentioned, they said 16 is the base size for web, times love, like for accessibility, but you can set the scale you want. So if you want 2 values below 16, you want 6 values above 16, you can set all of those here. Then you generate and it does that for you. Olayinka, did I answer your question? The name of the page ruler. So you don't necessarily need the page ruler, but yeah, this is what is called page ruler redux. You don't necessarily need it, because once you right click on an element and you inspect, you can see everything you want to see. So let me just show that example again. share web browser. Yeah. So you can, for example, I want to know how big this. Can you see my screen? This WebEx. You can. I thought as much. Okay. I believe you can see it now. So if I want to know how big this image is, right? I can either use the page ruler and just check it. And it says here is 474 by 211. Or I can just right click on the element and click on inspect. Why is it reloading? And right now it didn't select the image. So you can click on this first icon that says select an element in the page to inspect it. Then once you hover over it, it shows you it's 472 by 209, right? So just hover over anything and it shows you what you need to see. It shows the accessibility, it shows the font style, it shows the width, the height, the color that is used and everything. So yeah, this is an alternative to the, or let me say the page ruler is an alternative to this because this is better than the page ruler. Questions?
I have another question. Sorry.
Okay.
What's the difference between PX and REM?
To be honest, I don't really check the differences, but I just check the conversion sometimes. So if I see a value in REM, I just check online for PX to REM conversion. I really don't know because I know there's REM, there's EM, there is another one again. And there are people who say don't use REM because of so and so reasons. But in Figma uses just PX. Figma doesn't use REM. So yeah, Tommy has given an explanation on the chat, but yeah, you can just check that. Thanks, Tommy.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other question? Alrighty. If there are no more questions, thanks guys for attending the class today. I know it wasn't as fun as the last time, but I hope you learned something at the very least. Design Paul, over to you.
Thank you so much for today. Sorry, you guys are hearing another voice in the background. I'm multitasking. I'm also in another session. So thank you so much, Tega. Thank you for today. Sorry. Oh God. How can I do this? Okay. Sorry about that. I'm also in another session, so I'm just multitasking. All right, guys. Thanks for joining. Thank you, Jadine. I hope you all had a wonderful learning experience today. So, yeah, we'll talk in the Slack workspace. If you have any questions for the tutor, for the mentor, please feel free to reach out to him on Slack. You can mention him in the channel. You can send him a DM. So, and I'm sure he will be glad to answer all your questions. So, thank you guys, and do have a lovely weekend.